FromSoftware had been making games for 15 years before Demon's Souls came out, but that game changed everything for the studio. With the 1-2 punch of Demons and Dark Souls, FromSoftware ushered in a new subgenre that changed the way we talk about video games. Now, whether that's good or bad is up for debate, but the Soulsborne series, as it's come to be known, is here to stay. FromSoftware has been iterating on this idea for more than a decade, mixing up the formula with new settings and gameplay mechanics. Level design has always been my favorite aspect of game development, and the interconnected maps of these games have always fascinated me.
Did someone say a map? I am map maker by trade. I know everything, big map, a small map. I am descendant of Amerigo Vespucci.
The guy who named the whole Western Hemisphere after himself, even though lots of indigenous people already live there?
Yes, colonialism very bad, no bene. But I help with video, yes?
Fine.
Excelente.
So, maps. They've evolved from largely linear levels in Demon's Souls into a true open world with Elden Ring. And don't worry, I'm only going to show the trailers for that game in this video. Let's open up this bad boy. Just like with my Bloodborne video, I'm not going to get deep into the lore on this one. That said, plot does play a big part in how these worlds are laid out. You see, each one is built on 3 different pillars. Story beats, physical structure, and various callbacks all drive the design of these worlds. Optional and mandatory areas also factor in, and in fact the stuff you don't have to do is a big part of how we got to the open world of Elden Ring. But first, we need to go back to the beginning. Demon's Souls is set in the kingdom of Boletaria, and your goal is to hunt down those titular demons plaguing the land. Here's what that looks like in a story sense. Starting from the Nexus, you move through the 5 Archstones, named after the Small King, the Burrow Men, the Tower Queen, the Shadow Men, and the Chieftain. Rest in peace, giants. When you reach the end of each one, you slay the demon. What you're looking at right now is a hub and spoke design, where everything spreads out from one central point.
That is more of a flowchart than a map, but I will allow it.
After following all 5 spokes to their end, you'll return for one last chapter at the first Archstone, before looping back under the Nexus for the ending. Now you're about to see why Demon's Souls is the most linear game in this series. This is how the story flows, and this is how the levels are laid out.
Wait, nothing changed.
Exactly. You're free to ping-pong your progress between the 5 Archstones, but they never connect in any physical way. They're discrete biomes that don't touch. You follow one path to its conclusion, and you do the same thing in the next area. This isn't a bad thing, it's just how Demon's Souls is structured, and there are still lots of discoveries for you to make along the way. The game rewards you with shortcuts along the linear path. You've reached a checkpoint, you've earned the right to get back there more easily, and the game gives you the opportunity to do so. Whether it's finding keys to navigate the Prison of Hope or opening the gates of the Boletarian Palace, there are quicker ways to get back to where you were when you inevitably died. Now, that's not to say there aren't alternate routes or things to find apart from the critical path. Stonefang Tunnel, for example, has a pit you can carefully drop down if you want a faster route to the Flame Lurker below. What's more, heading there with pure white or black world tendency will bring you to Skurver the Wanderer. I have a whole video that explains this system more, but world tendency is where the bulk of Demon's Souls optional content comes from. Quests like retrieving Satsuke's magic sword only happen under the right conditions. The same goes for this path to the Dragonbone Smasher found at the very end of the second stage. Thankfully, optional content in later Souls games is much less conditional, and I would also say more substantial. But it all had to start somewhere. Demon's Souls is the originator of this modern subgenre, and it introduced us to motifs like fire-breathing dragons, a variety of environments, and NPC quests that would be present in every game that came after. In some cases, whole bosses would even show up again. Dark Souls is where FromSoftware really found its footing with the series. Instead of everything branching out from the Nexus and self-contained paths, your journey starts at Firelink Shrine and can take multiple directions. Once you arrive from the Undead Asylum, you're told that you need to ring 2 bells.
There are actually 2 bells of awakening.
One is up in the Undead Parish, guarded by the Bell Gargoyles. The other is down in Quelaag's domain, guarded by, you guessed it, Chaos Witch Quelaag. While it's a bit tricky and probably not advisable to ring the lower bell first, you totally can. So the start of Dark Souls' story looks like this. From there, you journey to Anor Londo to receive the Lord Vessel. This needs to be filled with 4 Lord Souls, from Seath the Scaleless, the 4 Kings, Gravelord Nito, and the Bed of Chaos. Acquiring these will open up the path to the final boss under Firelink Shrine. Much like how Demon Souls return to the Nexus for the climax, Dark Souls also loops back to the beginning a few times. Keep that in mind for the rest of this video. In the same way that Demon Souls doesn't stop you from doing the Archstones in any order you want, Dark Souls lets you ring the 2 bells and then collect the 4 souls in whatever order you want. You'll notice we've drawn a different shape from before. This is called the branch and bottleneck.
And now you're gonna make it look different, right?
I am indeed. This is Dark Souls' story layout, and this is how the map is actually connected. Since we're getting into more optional areas now, I've color-coded these so that orange represents the mandatory stuff, and blue is for anything you don't actually have to do. We're also going to be skipping DLC for this video because it's unconnected by its very nature.
I like it. Colors on maps or flowcharts, molto bene.
Dark Souls offers players a lot of agency in where to go, but often the path through each area is still linear. Some zones, like the depths, are deliberately built like a maze, with obnoxious slimes and basilisks that halt your progress. Others, like Blighttown, appear to be much larger, but your actual path along the planks is pretty straightforward, until you reach the bottom. The base of Blighttown is wide open, forcing you to trudge through poison to reach the lower exits. FromSoftware really loves its poison areas. Why? Anyway, Blighttown and Darkroot Garden are pretty sprawling, but they're the exception. Most areas like your Tomb of Giants or Anor Londo simply give the illusion of space by having a lot of open air that's often filled with frustrating obstacles. All of those areas I listed are required exploration, minus the depths. In fact, there's a good handful of optional areas in Dark Souls. You can skip the depths if you start with the Master Key, you barely have to touch the Valley of Drakes no matter which bell you ring first, and you can outright ignore places like Darkroot Basin, the Great Hollow, and Ash Lake. I got footage of those for the sake of this video, but I didn't have to. Ash Lake in particular exists just to guide you to the path of the Dragon Covenant. That's also a concept you should bookmark for when we talk about the next game. FromSoftware didn't have to string all these areas together, but it did, and the result is a world that feels so much more lived in and magical. There's a lore reason for the sunken New Londo ruins under Firelink Shrine. There's a purpose behind the fiery demon ruins and lost Izalith as you near what feels like the molten core of Lordran. Even the painted world of Ariamis and its Mario 64 threw the painting into a level style of separation has a justification. Plus, it's where we see a nod to the Phalanx boss from Demon Souls. Instead of separate archstones, we get all these different biomes linked together thematically and physically, often in surprising ways. Demon Souls' Archstone layout gives you an idea of what to expect in each level, while Dark Souls can totally ambush you with an intimidating boss, or pair of bosses. Speaking of duos, let's talk about Dark Souls 2. Its predecessor asked you to find 4 Lord Souls, and the sequel starts off the exact same way. No bells to ring first.
There are still bells though, right? I like the sound of the campane.
Oh, there are, and we'll get to them shortly. First, you have to collect the souls of the Lost Sinner, the Duke's Dear Freya, the Rotten, and the Old Iron King. Technically, you can collect 1 million smaller souls instead, but who has the time for that? Then you open up Dragon Lake Castle, find the missing King Vendrick, and take his ring. At that point, you need the Ashen Mist Heart to get the Giant's Kinship to learn more about the history of this kingdom before you can face Queen Nishandra, the final boss. As you can see, the story structure here is almost the same as Dark Souls' branching and bottlenecking, but inverted, and with one less branching section as you move toward the endgame.
Ah, and here comes the good part.
Right. Here's the story structure, and here's the layout of the world. It's even more sprawling than the first game. with branches that extend out to a lot more dead ends. Dark Souls 2 cranks the player agency of the previous game up to 11, not only with choices about which objective to tackle first, but also various paths to explore in individual areas. When you arrive at Cardinal Tower in the Forest of Fallen Giants, there are multiple sections to check out, and that only increases when you beat the last giant and acquire the Soldier's Key. You can head through the dark rooms to get back outside and fight an invader near another bonfire. You'll also find Kale the Mapmaker hanging out in a cave nearby.
I'll be back in Majula soon. Perhaps we will meet again and discuss maps at our leisure.
Okay, this guy is my new favorite, mi amico.
The same goes for Shaded Woods. When you reach Fork Road, you have 3 totally different paths to choose from. The right side leads to a misty section that you need to take for now, the middle leads to a King's Door that you'll open in the endgame, and the left one is how you'll reach Dranglake Castle once you have the required souls to open the Shrine of Winter along the road. Navigational choices like this are sprinkled throughout each zone, with tons of optional areas to find. A lot of these are tied to covenants, in the same way that you could find the Dragon Covenant in Ash Lake in the previous game. The Cathedral of Blue is, appropriately, home to the Way of Blue, and you'll find a counterpart to Dark Souls 1's Dragon Slayer Ornstein inside. The Iron Keep has Belfry Sol, the Lost Bastille has its twin, Belfry Luna. That's guarded by another throwback boss, the Belfry Gargoyles. By this point, the ways FromSoftware echoes and iterates upon its previous ideas should be getting clearer and clearer. One thing that Dark Souls 2 does very differently is string out its named locations through narrow passages. They don't feel as cohesive as the previous game for that reason, but they do call back to Demon Souls in a sense. In that game, you could warp to any checkpoint that you unlocked. Dark Souls 1 limited fast travel to select bonfires, but 2 let you teleport to anyone you've unlocked from the very start of the game. That's partially due to how long it takes to reach the end of some of these paths, but it also makes them feel like more distinct biomes. The world of Dark Souls 2 is less one big sprawl and more like a series of episodic stages. But even if they're less directly connected, they still offer options in how you can travel between them. You can reach the Lost Bastille, for example, by taking the ghost ship out of No Man's Wharf or by being picked up by a giant eagle from the Forest of Fallen Giants, again echoing Dark Souls 1 and the crow that carries you to and from Undead Asylum. What's more, the path you take changes how you navigate the Lost Bastille. The Ruin Sentinels only guard the route from the tower apart where the eagle drops you off. Otherwise, they're optional. I had trouble figuring out how to color code that whole section of my flowchart for this reason.
Yes, but I still follow you. It's okay.
The Grave of Saints can be skipped entirely too, if you drop to the bottom of the well in Majula. I did that in my playthrough for this video. You can even stagger out the final boss fights if you don't want to deal with them back to back. I first fought the Throne Watcher and Defender right after getting the King's Ring, then came back later with Giant's Kinship to deal with Nashandra.
You have proven yourself to me.
Everything I've listed so far revolves around Majula as your home base. You travel through there even more than Firelink Shrine, and its town square design is a far more substantial setting than the crumbling arches of the shrine. Dark Souls 2 is all about weaving your choices like this. Where to go and what to do first is one of the key things that would eventually lead us to the open world of Elden Ring. But we're only halfway through the series now, and there are a lot more armor dudes with big swords to go. For now though, let's put that aside and travel to a very different place. FromSoftware really changed things up with Bloodborne, giving us a much faster-paced, Lovecraftian adventure. It's also a lot more abstract in how you proceed through it, with vague hints about needing to escape the nightmare. Bear with me on this one because your objectives are much more dreamlike this time. Story-wise, you go out from the Hunter's Dream into Yharnam, where you can find 2 routes to the Vicar Amelia boss fight. When you beat her, the game shifts into nighttime, and Act 1 is complete. From there, you reach Bergenworth and face Rom, the Vacuous Spider. Winning that fight makes the Blood Moon rise. At that point, you find your way to the Unseen Village where the One Reborn slurps out of the Blood Moon. Beat that atrocity, and you can continue through the lecture building to the Nightmare of Mensis and face Murgo's wet nurse atop the castle. Then it's back to the Hunter's Dream where you'll face the final boss, or bosses, and get your ending. We've drawn a pretty linear map here. This pattern is known as the Gauntlet.
But there's a twister, right? Like the other map is way bigger?
Another point to the guy who sounds suspiciously like me with an accent that would shame my ancestors. Let's see what happens when we switch over to the physical map. As you can see, Bloodborne is overflowing with places to explore. You just have to take the appropriate path. Doing so gets you some pretty sweet rewards. Fighting through all of Forsaken Canehurst Castle is how you'll reach the Vileblood Covenant. Sound familiar? Journeying through Hemwick Charnel Lane and slaying the Witch of Hemwick wins you the Rune Workshop tool, which you can use to give yourself some important stat buffs. Beat the Amidala in the Nightmare Frontier, and it'll drop the Ailing Lauren Chalice, which unlocks a new tier of Chalice dungeons. We definitely don't have enough time to get into all the optional, procedurally generated content that those offer, but suffice it to say that if all those optional blue zones on my map weren't enough for you, there's an entire side game of exploring additional dungeons under the earth. All of this serves to give Bloodborne a much more dreamlike feel. Its levels can seem unconnected, or even illogical, but that's what gives this nightmare its Lovecraftian vibe. And they do often connect in ways that make sense. Old Yarnum is beneath the current day city. Bergenworth sits on a peaceful lake, separating its quiet building of higher learning from the hubbub of the city by way of the Forbidden Woods. Jumping between all of these zones calls back to Demon Souls. That game had archstones, Bloodborne has tombstones. Checkpoints, marked by lanterns, only let you bounce between that spot and the Hunter's Dream, in the same way that everything links back to the Nexus in Demon Souls. This compartmentalizes the sections of Bloodborne, sure, but it's also done out of necessity. The lecture building, for example, isn't physically connected to any other part of the game. FromSoftware built this system of fast travel around the segmented story it wanted to tell, and the loose connections follow the nightmarish logic of the plot. That's not to say there aren't recurring elements from the previous games, though. As stated, you do loop back around to the Hunter's Dream for the finale, in the same way that you did with earlier games' hubs. The shortcuts and discoveries you make when finding a new area are still very present as well. In fact, I'd say it's even more meaningful when you come across these connections or bear witness to some amazing sight. The dreamy, abstract flavor of the game only stands out more when you juxtapose the incongruous areas with the ones that are connected physically. It's like how the painted world feels so special in Dark Souls 1 because you get there through such a magical method versus other routes you've taken up to that point. If all of that sounds too heady, don't worry. We're gonna wake ourselves up now and go back to something more familiar. Just 1 year after Bloodborne, FromSoftware would return to Dark Souls to finish the trilogy. As you can probably guess,
you have to collect the 4 greatest souls, right?
more points to my amico. In one of the clearest callbacks in Souls history, your journey in this game begins at Firelink Shrine. Not that one, but also, yes, that one. Dark Souls 3 brings together a theme of recursion that we'll get into shortly. For now, yes, you're tasked with defeating the 4 Lords of Cinder. The Abyss Watchers, Aldrich, Yorm the Giant, and the Princes of Lothric. Then you'll once again loop back to Firelink Shrine and travel to the kiln of the First Flame beneath it, facing the Soul of Cinder and putting an end to this whole saga. Now, you'll notice I drew the chart differently this time. Dark Souls 3 sits somewhere between 1 and 2 in terms of the freedom it gives the player. This is just how I visualize it. You don't technically have to face the Abyss Watchers first, though most people will, and then return to the High Wall of Lothric with the cinders of everyone except Lothric the Younger Prince. But there are 2 methods to reach Lothric Castle, and the path really only forks in a major way a few times. Look, the layout of Dark Souls 3 is wonky by nature. Thematically, it makes sense. This is a world that's converging on itself. The intro plainly says this.
It is called Lothric, where the transitory lands of the Lords of Cinder converge.
So let's just shift over to the physical layout now to try to make things a bit clearer. When it's all laid out like this, things should make a bit more sense. We're still in something of a gauntlet pattern.
It's a good one. I got a feeling we're gonna see it again.
The first fork comes when you warp to the first stage, the High Wall of Lothric. From the beginning, you have 2 choices, right or left. Going right will soon bring you to a gate that can only be opened from the other side. FromSoftware loves making you do a loop before you can unlock a shortcut. Going left brings you to a big dragon that blocks your path with flames, hello callback, and ultimately to another fork at street level. First-time players probably won't recognize it as a fork, but you can technically kill Emma ahead of schedule, face the Dancer of the Boreal Valley, and go straight to the castle without fighting any of the other Lords of Cinder. Again, super not recommended, but it is doable. You'll find even more fire-breathing buddies when you take that route. Moving into the Undead Settlement, you'll have a choice in how to get to the lower section that leads to the Road of Sacrifices. You can cross a bridge, or move past it to fight a bunch of mad villagers around a bonfire in a scene pulled straight out of Bloodborne. Dark Souls 3 channels everything that came before it, not just its 2 prequels. In fact, its warp system is very akin to the Demon Souls Archstones. It's the only way out of Firelink Shrine at the start, and each zone is conveniently divided up in the fast travel menu. Unlike Demon Souls, there are some pretty wide open areas in this game. The Road of Sacrifices is a big forest that connects to both the Cathedral of the Deep and Farron Keep. Farron Keep itself is pretty sprawling too. How else is FromSoftware supposed to make you slowly trudge through more poison? Why? Of course, Dark Souls 3 also has plenty of classic climbs and spelunking sessions full of shortcuts. The Cathedral of the Deep has lots of big doors to open and elevators to activate. Same goes for the Grand Archives and Irithyll of the Boreal Valley. They harken back to past games with their layout and also with their aesthetics. The fight against this monster on the bridge into Irithyll gives me serious Bloodborne Cleric Beast vibes. Then when you go under the city into Irithyll Dungeon, everything feels like Demon Souls Prison of Hope again. You've got tricky enemies, keys that unlock faster routes, and even blood-curdling screams. Dark Souls 3 calls back to its older siblings a lot. You literally go back to Anor Londo, Smoldering Lake is clearly a cousin to Ash Lake, and slaying Yorm the Giant with the Storm Rider is incredibly similar to facing the Storm King in Demon Souls. But the game also starts to fold in on itself at points. The Untended Graves are an exact replica of the opening Cemetery of Ash tutorial area, but with a darker and much more dangerous tone. It's an optional area, and one that provides a real challenge with its boss fight against Champion Gundyr. Dark Souls 3's optional areas might be my favorite of the whole series because of how they're structured. They chain together like their own long side quest. From the High Wall of Lothric, you can enter the Consumed King's Garden and fight Oseros. Beating him unlocks his chamber, where you can learn the path of the Dragon Gesture and pass through an illusory wall that leads to the aforementioned Untended Graves. Using the Dragon Gesture on this cliff in Irithyll Prison will get you teleported to Archdragon Peak. It's all one cohesive, non-critical path that offers a lot more content than you might expect. Dark Souls 3's choices in side content might not be as apparent as previous games, but they are there in spades. And there are multiple rewards to earn and bosses to slay if you follow those leads. After the Dark Souls trilogy came Sekiro, Shadows Die Twice. Perhaps the greatest departure FromSoftware took at that point in its Soulsborne journey. There's really only one major optional section in the whole game, and you won't find a Covenant there. That's because Covenants are meant for multiplayer, and Sekiro is strictly single player. Focusing the game on you alone allowed the developers to craft more cinematic moments, like escaping from the giant serpent, along with more vertical and stealth elements. We'll get to all of that, but first, let's talk about how Sekiro's story is told. After the prologue, your goal is to find the Divine Heir Kuro at Ashina Castle. From there, you need 3 different elements to help sever his immortality: the Lotus of the Palace, the Mortal Blade, and the Shelter Stone. Once you return to a newly occupied Ashina Castle, you can technically end the game right there. The shortest path in any of these games, and definitely the worst ending you can get. Instead, you ought to continue to Fountainhead Palace and the Divine Realm, then make your way back to the flower field from the prologue to face the final boss. Once again, the loop back to the start is present here too.
I thought that we were gonna get another gauntlet. This looked more like a branch and bottleneck to me.
And you are correct. Now let's see what this last flowchart looks like in its physical layout. Not super different, right? The focus on single player meant that FromSoftware could apply more of a narrative focus to the overall layout of the game. But there's still an awful lot of freedom in how you progress through this world. You can't actually get the flower or blade without visiting Kuro first, but you can get awfully close. I explored almost the entirety of Mount Congo before climbing Ashina Castle, just to mix things up in a game I'd already platinumed. So there are some great options for tackling the game, if you know what you're doing ahead of time. Thanks to a free warp system via Sculptor's Idols, it's easy to zip around the map once you've reached a dead end too. In fact, this is used for a narrative purpose once you collect all 3 key items. The checkpoints in Ashina Castle get grayed out, as the town is attacked by Owl and his forces. It's another cinematic moment in line with the moon phases of Bloodborne, except it also changes the layout and enemy types in the area, something that might not have happened if Sekiro had allowed invasions from other players online. There's a whole lot of stuff in this game that sets it apart from the others. Stealth is a totally new element that encourages different strategies, and it's even mandatory for defeating the folding screen monkeys just before you obtain the Mortal Blade. Thanks to the posture system, most bosses feel like something that could never even live in another Soulsborne game. The Guardian Ape is one of the few exceptions, and as amazing as that fight is, it's not the first time we've faced a boss who holds their own screaming, decapitated head.
That is a very upsetting, no bene.
Now, of course, we have to talk about the grappling hook. The biggest mobility changes from other games come from being able to jump and swing around rooftops and cliffs to reach new heights. This gives each area in Sekiro so much more verticality. You climb Ashina Castle, you descend into Sunken Valley, you swing away from Mount Congo by grappling onto a kite. There are tons of opportunities to fly around like a Soulsborne Spider-Man, and it feels so freeing. Remember when I said Dark Souls 3's optional areas felt like their own quest? Well, in Sekiro, the lone optional zone basically is. You don't have to travel back in time to the Harada estate, but doing so means you'll unlock some new shinobi prosthetics, learn more about the events leading up to the start of the game, and get a necessary item for its best ending. Sekiro experimented with all of the elements we've talked about so far. It changed up the narrative structure by going strictly single player, it added some spice to the world layout by letting you see most of each branching path at any time, and it channels the games that came before it while introducing totally new systems of exploration and combat. Once veteran Soulsborne players came around the learning curve, there was such a sense of victory in pulling off those finishing blows. And now we're here, Elden Ring. From the looks of things, we're getting some sort of finishing blows or weak spot attacks here too, and the stealth and jumping verticality of Sekiro is back, albeit in a world that will allow for invasions and other multiplayer opportunities. I'm expecting to see a lot of other FromSoftware motifs too. These games just love opening big doors to reveal a new area or carrying the player over the horizon. Demon Souls lifted you to Upper Latria with gargoyles, Dark Souls 1 flew you into Anor Londo with lightning demons, 2 brought you to the Lost Bastille in the clutches of an eagle, Bloodborne teleported you from the clenched fist of an Amidala, Dark Souls 3 brought back the Anor Londo demons for a flight into the undead settlement, and Sekiro scooped you up to the Fountainhead Palace via a skyscraper-sized straw doll.
Ay, Pache, I get it. You got a lot of frequent flyer miles.
Yeah, I hope the idea of FromSoftware iterating on its ideas is crystal clear now. The open world of Elden Ring will only give the team more ways to experiment with this stuff. No matter how big an area might be in those past games, they still only have select entrances and exits. Darkroot Garden is vast, but it only connects to Darkroot Basin and the Undead Parish at specific points. Farron Keep is big and wide and very poisonous, but it only serves to transport you from the Road of Sacrifices to the Catacombs of Karthus. Looking at what little we've seen of Elden Ring's map, its regions seem to have continuous borders, allowing for more seamless travel between them, though I fully expect to warp back to the start of the game when the time comes to wrap things up. And I expect to stumble across all sorts of areas that are totally optional, but still begging to be explored. New weapons and spells and boss encounters are surely hidden inside those self-contained dungeons. That's the beauty of these Soulsborne games. You can go as deep as you want to. That applies not just to the lore, but to the actual world as well. Time and time again, we're invited to these mysterious lands to lift a curse or end an age of fire, and yet it never feels repetitive to me. That speaks not only to FromSoftware's quality of work, but also to its willingness to experiment. This new open world is the most drastic change to the formula I've seen in a while, but it's the natural evolution of everything that's come before. The linear, separated levels of Demon Souls evolved into the interconnected worlds of the games that came after, and they only got more and more beefed up with optional and experimental content. I've been here before, and I can't wait to be here again, and again, and again. These games forever resonate with those who spend time with them, like a hit song that lasts through the generations. And at this point, we all know how the chorus goes.
Hey, thank you so much for watching this video. If you like what Framework is doing, definitely hit that subscribe button in the middle. It would help me out an awful lot if you do. And if you want to see what we've already cooked up, you can hit that link on the far left. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.